So our next panel is Jainism in Dialogue with Abrahamic Traditions. And I'm very pleased to introduce the first speaker, Professor Tracy Tiemeier from Loyola Marymount University, who's professor of theology and is one of my mentors in comparative theology. So it's even more special to introduce you right now. The title of your presentation is Strange Ghouls and the Alien Other, a comparative theology of immigration. So Professor Tiemeier, we welcome you to the stage. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miller, and thank you to all of my fellow speakers. This has been a really rich day. I'm so thankful to be here. Last year, as a part of its crackdown on illegal immigration, the Trump administration instructed United States federal agencies to change their terminology from undocumented non-citizen to alien. This semantic change was not incidental, but part of a strategy to emphasize not only the foreignness of the migrant other, but also their inherent monstrousness. Indeed, the move was accompanied by the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to justify deportations of immigrant detainees without due process. In response, many religious groups have resisted both the hostile characterization of migrants and recent governmental actions. The U.S. Catholic bishops especially have been forceful, calling on their long history in support of the rights of migrants. However, even as the Catholic Church has been strong on immigration reform in the United States, its message has not been effective. Instead, prominent Catholic politicians, public figures, and everyday practitioners have tended to be in support of alien exclusion, detainment, and even violence. Through an encounter with the South Indian Jain epic tradition, I seek to offer a more effective theology of migration. But first, let me say a bit more on Catholic teaching on immigration and its challenges. In 2003, the Catholic bishops of the United States and Mexico issued a landmark joint pastoral letter on migration. In this letter, the bishops pledged to migrants and immigrants that they would be strangers no longer, and drew out 5 principles on migration from Catholic social teaching. First, people have the right to a full life of economic, political, and social opportunities in their home countries. Second, if such opportunities are not available, people have the right to migrate in order to support themselves and their families. Third, sovereign nations have the right to maintain their borders, but not if it is purely in the interest of securing wealth. Fourth, people who are leaving their home countries due to war or persecution should be protected and have their refugee and asylum claims considered fully. And finally, the human dignity and rights of all migrants, even those who enter countries illegally and are considered undocumented, must still be respected. The bishop's ultimate moral claim is to affirm Pope John Paul II's 1995 World Day of Migration message that in the church, no one is a stranger and the church is not foreign to anyone, anywhere. The principles of Catholic social teaching on migration continue to guide the American Catholic Church, even as U.S. Catholics continue to be divided on the topic of just migration policy and enforcement. But what is alarming is not the differences among us on policy. It is the rising tolerance of intolerance and the celebration of hate among people of faith that is so deeply disturbing to me. Seeking to offer moral leadership, Archbishop Jose Gomez of Los Angeles recently called for a new conversation on immigration. This call was affirmed by the U.S. bishops in a special message issued at their plenary assembly last fall. The U.S. bishops have tried to be consistent and united in their calling for immigration reform that recognizes the need for border maintenance but centers a culture of respect, solidarity, and human dignity. But strong and consistent teaching by the U.S. bishops does not seem to be changing many minds, and they cannot change minds or policy if their teaching plays into the very attitudes it seeks to change. In a recent podcast, for example, Vice President Vance, who is a vocal Catholic, defended his stance on immigration, saying, "It is totally reasonable and acceptable for American citizens to look at their next door neighbors and say, 'I want to live next to people who I have something in common with. I don't want to live next to four families of strangers.'" This position by Vice President Vance assumes that American society and faith can and even should be rooted in a sameness of culture and belief. Where there is no such sameness, there is no responsibility to embrace our neighbors if they are strange, if they are not like us. While it may seem as if a Catholic theology of strangers no longer counteracts such a notion of cultural homogeneity, it ironically depends on a similar logic. When Archbishop Gomez says, for example, that ours is the first nation founded on principles rooted in the Christian scriptures, the truth that all men and women are created equal, with God-given dignity and rights that can never be denied by any government, he means to highlight the relationship between biblical notions of dignity and American fundamental legal and moral frameworks. But in doing so, he emphasizes the Christianness of America. He also cites a 2025 study that shows that 1 in 12 Christians here are vulnerable to deportation or live with family members who could be deported. The message is clear. Innocent people and people of faith, that is Christians, are caught up in the immigration debate. But again, this strategy plays right into the idea that we should care about this issue because they are like us. Thus, even if the bishops call us to see the migrant as strangers no longer, their rhetoric does not fundamentally change the narrative that America is at its root a Christian nation, and that the people we should care about are those Christians who are essentially like us. The theology of kinship that Catholic magisterial teaching has championed is excellent at articulating what Irish philosopher William Desmond calls the intimacy of being. This metaphysics highlights the closeness of being as well as the deep intimacy of all things in a shared existence. It is a good start, but it does not adequately account for what Desmond simultaneously calls the strangeness of being. Being may be intimately familiar, but it is also fundamentally mysterious and strange. It is always beyond and more than we could ever grasp. Such a metaphysics preserves the otherness of all persons and things. We are strange to each other. We are strange to ourselves. But by emphasizing the Christian foundation of the Americas and highlighting the suffering of innocent Christian migrants, the U.S. bishops cannot fully counter the forces of dehumanization and violence within immigration policy. For if we insist on kinship and strangers no longer, we are not necessarily willingness to embrace real otherness, especially when we do not know them, look like them, believe like them, or behave like them. I now turn to the Jain tradition to help us think differently about the strange other and migrant. Nīli, the Pei of Parayanur, is a village deity from Tamil Nadu in southern India who has become more broadly integrated into South Indian folklore, literature, and practice. As a Pei, Nīli is a being variously understood to be a possessing spirit, a flesh-eating ghoul, or even a malevolent demon. She is also portrayed as a yakshi, a shape-shifting seductress or vengeful nature spirit. At the same time, she is a fierce mother goddess, often identified or associated with Sakyaman, a wrathful fertility deity who must be appeased in order to stave off her anger and receive her blessings. Pei Nīli also has become part of South Indian Jain tradition. The Nīli is a 9th century South Indian Tamil Jain epic poem that defends Jainism against many of the other religious and philosophical traditions of the time. It unfolds in 10 chapters as Nīli, here called Nīli or Woman with the Blue Hair, defeats a series of debate partners from other contemporary fiefdoms. The epic opens with Jain monk Munachandra, who is dwelling on cremation grounds and practicing his austerities. He sees animals being sacrificed at a Kali temple and is horrified by the violence. He convinces the devotees that the goddess would be satisfied by clay animal offerings. Kali becomes furious and sends Pe Nīli to scare Munachandra away. Nīli attempts to terrify him, but cannot distract him from meditation. She then attempts to seduce him, but he will not be moved from his practice. Nīli is deeply impressed and seeks initiation on the Jain path. Munachandra teaches Nīli as she dedicates herself to Jainism. Now that Nīli has committed herself to Jain Dharma, she travels the country to debate other traditions. Her first 4 encounters are with Buddhists, including the Buddha himself. Nīli defeats them all in debate, focusing on exposing contradictory teachings and on challenging Buddhist doctrines like the no self. Nīli also dispels false understandings of Jain teaching, with a particular concern to defend Jain ascetical practices, nonviolence to all living beings, including animals and plants, and metaphysics, particularly the significance of Anakhantavada. After proving the superiority of Jain thought and practice over Buddhism, Nīli journeys to defeat representatives from other major Indian philosophical, theological, and ritual schools at the time. Nīli teaches the truth of karma as the cause of the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. If karma consists in false faith, knowledge, and conduct, the cure is right faith, knowledge, and conduct, which leads to ultimate liberation. She highlights the necessity of Anakhantavada for understanding the many seeming contradictions in life. In her final debate with the materialist court scholar Pichachahan, she argues that materialism is untenable and that there must be a soul. She proves the persistence of a spirit beyond bodily death by using her own pei powers to reveal the face and mouth of a Pichachu, a malevolent flesh-eating spirit. It is the spirit of Pichachahan's mother, which persists beyond death. With that, Nīli has proven the truth of Jainism. She has become a dedicated Pei, an accomplished philosopher, and a powerful goddess of Jainism. That the primary character of the epic is Pe Nīli of South Indian imagination is not incidental. She not only teaches the truth of the Jain tradition, but also embodies it. The author positions Nīli, a widely known and violent, seductive being with many ambiguous associations, as an ideal Jain practitioner, theologian, and champion debater. What better message for the power of Jainism than one utterly transformed by it? Nīli herself travels across time and space to meet with and defeat her famous opponents, past and present. Here, she is following the life of a Jain renunciant and nun. Beyond the epic's portrayal of her education in philosophy, theology, and scripture, which is a lifelong duty for Jain nuns, it also shows Nīli's training in spiritual and physical disciplines typical for Jain nuns at the time. Her travels across India follows a common feature of Jain monastic life, a wandering itinerant lifestyle with no attachment to family or home. Thus, Nīli is a migrant, a voluntary one, but a migrant nonetheless. As a wandering ascetic, she crosses borders to meet with and debate her intellectual opponents. The towns she visits are in different kingdoms, and she even appears to cross the boundaries of time in order to meet with and debate the Buddha. With each move and each border crossing, Nīli expands the truth of Jainism. Nīli's voluntary migration across borders in service to Jain teaching is not entirely dissimilar from early Christian apostles and disciples who carried Jesus' message far and wide. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus calls the apostles to go out by 2, taking nothing for their journey except a staff. No bread, no bag, no money in their belts. They can only wear one tunic and must wear sandals. Jain nuns also practice non-attachment by wearing simple white seamless clothes. For both Christian and Jain traditions, voluntary migration is a grounded spiritual practice. As such, accoutrements are limited and simplicity is key. In the Jain context, this is tied to the practice of non-attachment. Non-attachment to home, goods, clothes, food, and even borders. In the New Testament context, this is tied more perhaps to the pressing need to spread the good news of Jesus across the nations and to travel quickly. Even so, the faith required to travel with no warm clothes, food, or money is also tied to a kind of non-attachment to material needs. Thus, Nīli as itinerant preacher can help highlight Christian spiritual practices of itinerant preaching, as well as retrieve a more porous notion of borders. Borders are artificial creations, and there is a higher spiritual reality than the nation. To consider Nīli as both voluntary migrant and pay is instructive in another way as well. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus gives the apostles authority over unclean spirits, and so they travel around casting out many demons. But the power over and casting out of evil demons can easily slip into a demonization of opponents, requiring their casting out. But Nīli as demon or ghoul, and as a devoted one at that, again challenges our easy categorizations and oppositional hierarchies. How do we cast out a demon from our borders when they are also a model of faith? In the end, an approach to migration that embraces the strangeness of the stranger can learn from Nīli embodiment of Jain teaching. Nīli is a ghoul, a demon, a nature spirit, a fierce village goddess, a model ascetic, and a traveling theologian, all at the same time. A dedicated yet liminal and strange figure, Nīli offers a powerful message of uncompromising strangeness for our times. Across folkloric, devotional, and literary traditions, Nīli or Nīli is both outsider and migrant. As outsider, she is portrayed as a low caste, female, non-human being. She is fierce mother goddess, vengeful nature spirit, flesh-eating ghoul, sexual seductress, and demon devotee. She has a social and moral ambiguity that is inherent to her existence and is far from the image of the typical religious exemplar. She is also a boundary crosser and migrant. She shapeshifts, flies, appears and disappears, transporting herself and others across space, time, and realm. Her wider South Indian narratives often highlight the movement from home or tree to homelessness and displacement. Within the Tamil Jain tradition, Nīli is a vegetarian ghoul and brilliant Jain debater and teacher, constantly on the move as a wandering ascetic and scholar. Within Jain tradition, Nīli both embodies and teaches the Jain principle of anekantavada. Jain many-sidedness allows for multiple truths and differing points of view. Nīli, the paid-turned traveling theologian and renunciant, may have given up her flesh-eating ways upon dedicating herself to Jain teaching, but she holds on to her terrifying tactics. While it would not be acceptable in polite company or staid philosophical conversation to conjure the dead, Nīli is not troubled by social conventions. She remains dangerous pay, even as she models the life of a wandering Jain ascetic without attachment or home. When speaking of the migrant, immigrant, refugee, and asylum seeker, no one position can capture the complexity of their being and their situation. A theology of strangers still longer that integrates the Jain value of many-sidedness clarifies that there both is and is not a stranger, and the stranger both is and is not like us. It also insists that reality is complex and multiple. It is many-sided. As a result, there is space to take a non-absolutist approach to migrants and borders. Those who migrate are complex and many-sided. We should not force them into a framework where they have to be just like us, or perfect victims, or one of the good ones. People are people. We must hold space for ambiguity. It is easy to demonize. It is harder to listen to the demon, engage her, and even learn. Through the Jain notion of anekantavada, distinct, even opposing things can be present in the same reality. And so we must cultivate a much more robust and layered moral imagination when considering the migrants, immigrants, and refugees in our midst. There is no doubt that we must look beyond our comfortable lives to see kin across our cultures, nations, and borders. The bishop's teaching of strangers no longer insists that we recognize the sacred dignity of all persons and all beings. This is a wonderful first step, but as intimate as being is to us, it also remains strange. It is always beyond our ability to fully experience, grasp, or understand. So let us embrace the strange. Let us embrace the alien. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tiemeier. That was a wonderful exhibition of comparative theology, and it gave us a lot to talk about when we get to the discussion. And of course, that was quite applicable to everything that's going on right now in the US. So I can already see comments and questions coming in. You can take a look at those before the discussion, and then we can address the ones that we have time for.